quick question. How many of you have been on holiday and have come back feeling sick? Yeah, I think a fair few of us. Well, our first speaker tonight is Ipsita. Ipsita is a research physician who is currently studying for a PhD, that's right, here in Bangkok at the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit. Tonight she is talking about how travel affects the spread of disease. Please, can you kindly welcome Ipsita?
Hello everyone, my name is Ipsita Sinha. It's a name from the northeast of India, so I'm Bengali, and a research physician from the UK. I'm currently doing my PhD under Professor Richard Maud's group in epidemiology. For those of you who don't know what epidemiology is, it's the how, the what, the where and the when of why a disease occurs from the public health perspective. Essentially, what can we do to stop it or manage it on a public scale? So I'm doing my PhD in moral epidemiology on population movement in Bangladesh, especially in relation to malaria. And that is why I'm going to talk about how travel impacts infection in a more general sense. So the first thing you might ask is, what is this image on the left-hand side? So this image is essentially the global footprint of the human race, I might say. It's the Anthropocene era. So you've got the roads everywhere in green, you've got shipping routes going down in blue, you've got red spots for the urban areas, and you've got the air networks as well. So essentially, you can see that there are humans, the effect of human is everywhere. So how does this actually impact travel in each of these senses? Right, so just a little bit about the breakdown of my talk. So the first thing is I'm going to go through some case studies, because normally everyone thinks stereotypes, migrants, workers, truck drivers cause HIV, AIDS or TB, or diphtheria, in this case in Bangladesh at the minute, but what else is there? Then I will just touch very briefly on the epidemiological process, because you can't really get away from it if you look at infection. And then some technology that we're currently exploring in our group to monitor travel, especially in relation to disease. Finally, it's all very well to have technology, but how does it actually fit in with the overall focus of public health is the important question. Right, so this is my first question. This is basically going back in history. So I'm looking at what's the most famous pandemic there is, just looking at outbreaks between 1347 to 1760. It's based on historical shipping and overland routes. Anyone? Yeah, there we go. So this is the plague outbreak based on the bug Yersinia pestis on the back of a gerbil. Apparently it's not a rat. Traveling along shipping routes and trade routes. So, obviously there's another map. That's what we do. We look at geographical information systems and visual representation of data. So here we go. What is this route over here? Yeah. So this is the blue lines represent like famous routes, going along international borders in those days, along the countries. And then you can see this blue lines, and the black blobs are the peripheral ports. So the big fat black blobs are the edges of the outbreaks, and that's where there was the most impact. But then it did spread inwards into the red blobs. And this was a recent study published in Nature, Scientific Reports 2017. So essentially they kind of looked at the DNA of plague victims and also historical articles to try to understand how the plague actually spread. So that's in the past. So it shouldn't be a problem now. There's treatments and antibiotics for everything. So it should really be worrying. So let's come to the next one. So now we're in Asia, right? So this is more recent, 2002 and 2003. The black blob here is China and Hong Kong, where the severe acute respiratory syndrome started, SARS. And as soon as people started talking about it, it seemed like within 0 days, so this is 0, dark red going up to yellow, the cases actually spread to North America. especially in Toronto, it was quite like even a medical doctor unfortunately passed away because there was no notice of how severe the disease is. So red represents spread in 0 days. I mean, eventually this was brought, actually, considering the risk, it was brought very quickly under control, but it did, it shows like, you can really spread something very quickly through the global airline network. And so these outbreaks can also happen seasonally, like we see with influenza. So this picture is from 11th June 2009, when the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. It started off with swine flu, H1N1 from pigs in Mexico, and pretty soon it spread to all the big cities around. And almost more than 14,000 people ended up dying that year. And the thing is, we're also currently in another flu epidemic at the minute, the H3N2, so this kind of, the people are very much aware of how things spread, I guess. So moving on, we tend to think, okay, so it's a global spread, airline spread, but there's different scales of spread as well. So there's kind of local spread. Like for example, consider polio now. Polio is a virus that's easily preventable amongst children. Everyone has their vaccine. It's unheard of basically nowadays. So on the left-hand side again, there's another map. So dark green represents 90% vaccine coverage, right? So in order for polio to be well controlled, you need good vaccine coverage amongst the kids. However, you've got Nigeria in almost white, which is 30 to 40% vaccine coverage. And yes, because, this was because of conflict and distrust of health professionals. And what happened happened inevitably is the number of polio cases went up in Nigeria. The number of polio cases went up in Nigeria, but at the same time it spilled over into Cameroon, which was a country that had declared polio is over and celebrated it. It went over in Cameroon through the porous border. So it's all very context driven. Then finally, I'm bringing it back to Southeast Asia. This is some work done by our own organization, MORU. So we all know about malaria, and it's recently been in the news that there is anti-malarial drug resistance in Cambodia, but it's actually spread to Vietnam as well. So this work was done through looking at the differences in the DNA of the parasite that causes malaria. So they looked at genetic differences to try and find how the parasite is spread. But does that actually equate to human mobility? So what role does human mobility have in the spread? And this is still an open question. Right. So what is it about epidemiology like? So how do we actually kind of tackle this question? So we can, even from like the audience, we can have a very simple system of dealing with it. We can consider something that we start learning in medical school, which is the epidemic triangle, the triad. So here we have the top part is the pathogen, which could be a virus or a bacteria or a parasite. Then the host is all of us, anyone from the audience, so back and forth infection. And then we have transmission into a vector. Back and forth from the vector, and from the vector to the pathogen. So anyone know what a vector is? Well, basically, it's just us. For example, if you cough on someone and they get the cold, then we're the vector as well as the host. But a vector could also be a mosquito. They carry the malaria parasite, as does humans, and can pass it along. Or it could be bats. In the case of swine flu, eventually they figured out it was bats in China. Or it could be ticks, all sorts really, just have to keep looking. It's very exciting. But the main thing to say is everything is context specific. It's all about the background. What works in one country or even in one village will not work somewhere else. So you have to look at environmental factors. For example, like for dengue, are you near a water source? Dengue is a problem in Thailand, for example. Or for malaria, are you near a forest? What are you doing? Are you going out in dusk, exposing yourself to mosquitoes? So there's human and social behavioral factors. Are you washing your hands? Is there a public health message there? And then you look at biological factors. For example, I alluded to malaria having drug resistance. In that case, it's a mutation of the actual parasite. So we need to consider all of these things. And then when you look at travel with it, it just complicates it even more, because how does these different factors, human factors and biological factors, spread or move around? So we look at when we look at travel, it's not enough to say that people travel far away. We have to look at daily travel, for example, fishermen, truck drivers, or daily commuting. Then we can go on to look at holidays, great, or we can go look at, unfortunately, forced migration. That's a serious problem. You can, for example, look at what, Rohingya is kind of moving over, and then there's an epidemic of diphtheria there at the minute. It's just, so there's different things to consider. So next we also need to consider the disease pattern. So there are different things to consider. Is something an endemic? Is something endemic, or an epidemic, or a pandemic? So what's endemic? So someone having a cold on a day and taking a few days off is just endemic. We just take it for granted this happens to people every day. Not every day, but maybe 5 times a year, especially if you have kids. But then epidemic is when the number of cases goes up and starts to make a problem, like having flus and it's going up. And then pandemic is when this goes right across several continents and causes serious problems. So that's a global epidemic. So just to get the terms clear, Right. So when we're investigating these, we need different modalities, different scales. So what is the role of technology in understanding the interaction between travel and infection? Essentially it's a bit like being a disease detective, but putting your technology hat on at the same time. So basically that whole picture of being in the field, not true. You're pretty much behind a computer looking at data all day, and data cleaning. So yeah. So I'm just going to give a few examples of what is in kind of some brief examples of what can be done. So this is a model, basically an interactive model. It's at vectorborne-diseases-air.com. Essentially, this model can, if you go to that website, you can go and find out what your risk of getting a mosquito-borne illness, such as malaria, chikungunya, or dengue, is on a monthly level based on air travel. So where are they getting this data from? So the air travel is from another website, which they kind of refer to. It's from the all the number of air travels in 2016. They combine it then with climatic data. For example, if it's warm, in warm, hot climate, you're more likely to get dengue. Then they combine it with satellite data, and they combine it with known data about mosquitoes. However, I just want to say that all of this is very uncertain, So although this kind of says that this is they will say that this is your risk of getting a certain disease where you go somewhere. How does one actually convey the uncertainty behind this? Because it's just one figure, you boil it down, And what use is it at the minute, operationally, to public health programs? Can we use it to make decisions about our own travel? It's not quite clear. So there's still very much research. This is a group from Southampton, Andy Tatum's group, World Population. Right, so this is the next one. So this is we're doing something similar at the minute in Asia, but we'll just talk about already published results. So this is the use of mobile phone records to map malaria in Namibia. So essentially what's happening is they are collecting anonymized call records. So you can't identify a single person, It's like at population level from call towers. They're collecting call data records and processing it to try and understand the movement between different health districts. So this is the number of movements. So more than 30,000 is red. So these are all the red clusters of movements. They then combine it with the known malaria counts for that year to get an idea of what the sources are in red. So i.e., will this place be exporting the disease? Are they and then what are the states? So will this place be receiving the disease? And why is that? So, we want to break the chain of transmission. We don't want the sources or sinks to be connected, so we need to understand movement, because that's how you control, you develop your control activities. because there is a target to eliminate malaria, because there is treatments for it. So that so that's the way forward. So this work, there's an interactive dimension to it, and you can go to flowminder.org to have a look at more case studies in regards to population movement. So the final thing I want to talk about is actually the Google flu trends. This is another, this is a forecasting tool actually. So you can use this tool to predict the number of flu cases in a certain week. So this tool has been discontinued. So essentially the way they developed it was they used the number of searches as a basis to predict flu. However, it was a black box and one didn't really know what was going on behind that algorithm. And there was a lack of recalibration which resulted in deviation and 140% greater increase compared to what the actual peak was, even though they tied their data to the CDC or the Center of Disease Control in America. So this lack of, so what I don't want to actually say that this is a good or a bad thing, because you always learn from your lessons, and now they're giving research grants to actually develop further forecasting tools. But what I want to say is big data is still useful, but it's only useful if you take into account what the policy goals are. It needs to be grounded in scientific and policy goals and tied up to the actual surveillance data, which brings me back to what our group does, but I'll just talk about this first. So this is one more example this is something that our group does. So we have developed an initiative called the Group Mappers. It's a crowdsourcing initiative. So I do my research in Bangladesh, and my colleague Sajid Ibn Zaman actually leads this. So he and a group of other spatial analysts, students, and actually general members of the public sit together and use Google Earth actually to identify where all the villages are. Because so as to then we can use this data to try and understand how people move around the villages. Because at the moment we don't really have that much of an idea about this at a finer scale where people are. We only know where people are at district level or sub-district level. So this is something that can be replicated everywhere actually in the greater Mekong sub-region, and can be done by someone just sitting behind a computer at home. Anyway, so just coming back to our final question, slide is what is our end goal? As I've constantly alluded to, you have all these technologies and research kind of tools, but it needs to be matched up with what the policy goals are. For example, so I'm kind of using simple travel questionnaires to measure how people move around from A to B. So how does this actually bridge the gap through research? We need to work closely with national surveillance programs and national and public health teams to stay relevant and have meaningful impact. So that's why we need the surveillance data from control programs. So we collaborate with them, and they kind of advise us about what to do next. We then kind of match up technologies, for example, parasite genetics, for malaria, mobile phone call data records, geographic information systems. You've seen plenty of examples of them today, like the visual representation of disease through maps. And then also satellite and climate data. In fact, you can get people from the crowd, from citizens, to help with actually extracting and helping us with getting satellite and climate data. So the final problem is how to visualize incomplete or uncertain data. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Well, what an amazing talk! I think another round of applause.